Hello, I'm Gajanan Dwivedi, and in the second session of the History Simplified series, I'm going to cover the national movement from the period 1905 to 1920 through the UPSC previous year questions. And like the previous session, the effort would be to discuss the previous year questions in such a way so that we could generate a very good conceptual clarity about the part of the syllabus as well. Now, I will start with a simple question and gradually I'll keep on increasing the difficulty level of the questions. The first question is from UPSC 2016. The question says that what was the main reason for the split in Indian National Congress at Surat in 1907? We know that in Surat there was a split between the extremist and the moderate leaders. Now, what happened in Surat basically was the outcome of already growing controversy between the extremists and the moderates due to multiple ideological differences. First, let's try to understand it that if you try to differentiate between the moderate and the extremist ideology first. The moderates, they believed that the British rule was good. So they believed in benevolence of the British rule. The extremists, they never believed in benevolence of the British rule and they believed that the British rule was always exploitative. The moderates came from the upper sections of society, elite classes, and that is why they were somewhat more pro-British in their approach. The extremists, they came from educated middle class and they were more aware about the imperial nature of the British rule and they did not believe in benevolence of the British rule like a concept. Then, the moderates did not believe in mass movement. The extremists, they believed in mass mobilization and mass movement. The moderates, they were less radical in their approach. The extremists, they were much more radical in their approach against the British. The moderates, what they went for the constitutional way of agitation of prayer and petition. The extremists, they went for the extra constitutional way of Swadeshi and boycott. So the extremists, they believed in extra constitutional way of protest of Swadeshi and boycott. The moderates, what they demanded, Indianization of civil services, Indianization of legislature. So their main demand was Indianization. On the other hand, the extremists, what they demanded, Swaraj or self-rule. What they demanded, Swaraj or self-rule. Already, there were so many ideological differences between both the sides. And gradually, on two particular issues, the differences between both the sides aggravated further. These were the issues of Swadeshi and boycott. The extremists, what they wanted to make the Swadeshi movement an all India movement. But this was not acceptable to the moderates because the moderates never believed in mass mobilization and mass movement. Second controversy, boycott. The extremists wanted a bigger boycott and to include in this boycott also the boycott of legislatures. But the trouble was that the moderates, they had worked throughout the life to get entry into legislature. So they would not support the idea of boycott of the legislatures. So on the issue of how big the Swadeshi movement should be and the issue of how radical the boycott should be, there was a growing difference between the moderate and extremist leaders group. And in this context, the three sessions of Congress became very important. Like first was 1905 Benares session of Congress. The 1905 Benares session of Congress was presided by Gokhale. And in this Benares session of Congress, a mild resolution was brought by Congress supporting the ideas of Swadeshi and boycott. The next session of Congress was historic session of Congress of Calcutta that was presided by Dadabhai Nauroji. In this session, due to the pressure generated by the extremists, 4 resolutions they were brought. They were Swadesi, boycott, national education, and Swaraj. Extra information that you should have, that this Calcutta session proved to be the historic session because for the first time, Congress officially put the goal of Swaraj or self-rule. Extra information again that you should have, that in 1929, there was Lahore session of Congress presided by Jawaharlal Nehru, and there Congress for the first time demanded Purna Swaraj. So what you have to retain here, that it was in Calcutta session of Congress that for the first time Congress demanded Swaraj, and it was the Lahore session of Congress in 1929, much later, that Congress would demand Purna Swaraj. Calcutta session, the 4 resolutions which were passed by Congress, it led to a big controversy between the extremists and the moderates, and moderates wanted to dilute these 4 resolutions in the next session of Congress that was there in Surat in 1907. The Surat session of Congress was presided by a very moderate leader, Ras Bihari Ghosh. You have to be careful that Ras Bihari Ghosh was not Ras Bihari Bose, because Ras Bihari Bose was famous revolutionary. Here you are talking about Ras Bihari Ghosh, a very prominent moderate leader. In this Surat session of Congress, the moderates wanted to dilute the 4 resolutions supporting Swaraj, national education, boycott, and Swadesi. And when this was there, it led to a massive controversy between the extremists and the moderates, and the extremists, they were expelled from Congress, leading to the Surat Split. So, if the question is asking that, what was the main reason for the split in Indian National Congress at Surat, then the answer would be that the extremists, they were losing the faith in the capacity of the moderates to negotiate with the British, and they were constantly demanding more radical methods of politics against the British. This was the main reason that led to the Surat Split of 1907. The next question is 2004 UPSC question. We have to figure out the correct statements. The first statement says that the first session of Indian National Congress was held in Calcutta. This is wrong. In the first session of History Simplified series, we discussed that the first session of Congress was held in Bombay in 1885. And this was held in Gokul Das Tejpal Sanskrit College. The second statement says that the second session of Indian National Congress was held under the presidency of Dadabhai Nauroji. This is true. In 1886, the second session of Congress was there in Calcutta, and this was presided by Dadabhai Nauroji. So the second statement is correct. The third statement says that both Indian National Congress and Muslim League held their sessions at Lucknow in 1916 and concluded the Lucknow Pact. This is again correct, that in 1916 there was famous Congress League Pact. Let's have some extra information about the Lucknow session of Congress in 1916. By 1916, the national movement had intensified, and in this perspective, the Lucknow session of Congress became very important. What happened that in Lucknow session of Congress, 2 very important events that took place. What were those? First, there was a union between the extremists and the moderate leaders again. Just try to remember this, that the split between the extremist and the moderate leaders, it came in Surat, and in Lucknow came the union between the extremist and the moderate leaders. Why this union was possible? There were basic reasons that led to the union between the extremist and the moderate leaders. The most basic reason was the First World War. The time period of World War was 1914 to 1919. The World War, the First World War, basically ended in 1918, but the peace treaties, they were finalized in 1919, so we can take the year as 1914 to 1919. The First World War led to a huge economic crisis in India. The British diverted huge resources away from India. And when this was there, the economic crisis also aggravated a political churning in India. And the leaders, both the extremists and the moderates, they were willing to capitalize on this political churning in India. Second reason why the Lucknow session led to the union between the extremists and the moderates was that both the sections, they had realized that the division between them in Surat had led to overall stagnation in national movement. The third reason why they could come together, because the leaders like Tilak and Annie Besant, they played instrumental roles in bringing a coordination between the extremists and the moderates. Also by this time, the extremists, they were suppressed by the British and their demands had become somewhat moderate. Tilak said that the Swaraj of today would be within the overall British Empire. And the moderates, their demands had become somewhat more extremist. They had realized that the Act of 1909 was designed to create a divide between the extremists and the moderates. So, the extremists, they had become more moderate in their demand. The moderates, they had become more extremist in their demand. And that is why the union was feasible between both the sides in Lucknow session of Congress that was presided by the famous moderate leader Ambika Charan Majumdar. Ambika Charan Majumdar. Then, if we talk about the Lucknow session, this was again very important because in Lucknow came in 1916 the Congress League Pact. Congress League Pact. What was the pact? Both the sides together demanded self-rule. Self-rule from the British. That was called Congress League Pact of 1916 that was achieved in Lucknow. Again, why this coordination was possible between Congress and Muslim League? You have to understand that the First World War again was responsible for this coordination. In First World War, Britain and France like countries, they were fighting against the aggressor countries. What were the aggressor countries? Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria and Turkey. And Britain and France like countries, they were fighting against these aggressor countries. So when Britain was fighting against Turkey, the relations between Britain and Turkey deteriorated. But Sultan of Turkey was considered caliph. And Khalifa or caliph was considered the single religious and political head of Islam. So there was a growing resentment among the Muslims across the world against the British. That also got reflected in India. And Muslim League was compelled to reflect it back. That made the compromise between Congress and Muslim League possible. Again, we have to admit that in this compromise, instrumental roles were played by Tilak and Muhammad Ali Jinnah. It is very remarkable to find that Muhammad Ali Jinnah, in the initial part of his career, was very much a supporter of Hindu-Muslim unity. In the later part of career, he turned against Hindu-Muslim unity. In fact, he was such a big supporter of Hindu-Muslim unity that he was called by Sarojini Naidu as the prophet of Hindu-Muslim unity. Three personalities, Jinnah, Sir Syed Ahmad Khan and Muhammad Iqbal. In initial part of their career, They were very big supporters of Hindu-Muslim unity, but later they turned against it. Now, when this Congress League Pact was there, certainly both of them together demanded self-rule from the British. But at the same time, to get the compromise, Congress accepted the stand of Muslim League on separate electorate, and that proved to be a disaster. Because accepting separate electorate would be giving legitimacy to the communal politics of Muslim League. What was separate electorate? Under the system of separate electorate, the British would categorize the Muslims into separate constituencies, from where only the Muslims they would be able to vote, and from where only the Muslims they would get elected. It was a very communal idea. And the British brought this system in India to keep divided the Hindus and Muslims, because Hindus and Muslims together, national movement would have been too powerful for the British to be able to control. Now, in short run, there was a benefit when this Congress League Pact was there, but in longer run, it proved to be very problematic, because this gave legitimacy to the communal demand of Muslim League of separate electorate. So Lucknow session was known for two big things: the union between the extremists and the moderates, and the Congress League Pact. So the second and the third statements, they are correct, and here the answer would be C, 2 and 3. Another question is from UPSC 2013, and it is asking about Annie Besant. One of the most prominent moderate leaders was Annie Besant. She was Irish lady. And inspired by the Irish Home Rule movement, she started Home Rule movement in India. Then we should know that there was not one Home Rule League, there were two Home Rule Leagues. One Home Rule League was established by Annie Besant in September 1916. Another Home Rule League was established by Tilak in April 1916. Annie Besant's Home Rule League was headquartered at Madras. Tilak's Home Rule League was headquartered at Pune. Tilak's league was operational in central provinces and Maharashtra-like area. And rest all the part of India, it was Annie Besant's league that was operational. Both the leagues, they coordinated with each other and demanded self-rule within the British Empire, home rule within the British Empire. Certainly, when you talk about the Home Rule movement, it would be right to say that Annie Besant was responsible for starting the Home Rule movement. The second statement says that Annie Besant was the founder of Theosophical Society. It's incorrect. Theosophical Society was established in New York by Olcott and Blavatsky. Olcott and Blavatsky. And this Theosophical Society was much interested in the philosophies of the old religions, and that is why naturally it was so much inspired by Hindu religious philosophy. And that is why later it was headquartered in India at Adyar. In India, Theosophical Society later was headed by Annie Besant and got a lot of prominence. So certainly Theosophical Society became prominent under her, but it would not be right to say that she was founder of Theosophical Society. So second is gone. Then the third statement says that once she was the president of Indian National Congress. This is also true. By 1916, due to this Home Rule movement, Annie Besant had become that prominent a leader in India that in 1917, the Calcutta session of Congress was presided by Annie Besant. Again, it's very interesting to figure out the first woman ever to preside over Congress session. She was Annie Besant. Extra information again, that in 1925, the Kanpur session of Indian National Congress was presided by Sarojini Naidu. And Sarojini Naidu became the first Indian woman to preside over Congress session. What you have to retain here that the first woman to preside over Congress was Annie Besant, and the first Indian woman to preside over Congress session was Sarojini Naidu. So, first and the third statements, they are correct, and answer here would be C, 1 and 3. The next question is from UPSC 2018 exam. And the question is asking that in 1920, which of the following changed its name to Swarajya Sabha? The answer is simple. By this time, the All India Home Rule League was on decline and it was renamed by Gandhiji as Swarajya Sabha in 1920. So why the movement declined? Why the Home Rule movement was on decline? There were three reasons. First, that there was August Declaration. There was August Declaration of 1917, which proposed the progressive realization of responsible government in India within the overall British Empire. The British, they came up with the proposal of progressive realization of responsible government in India within the overall British Empire in this August Declaration of 1917. And this is what was the demand of the Home Rule movement. So from this time onward, Annie Besant became completely pro-British and her league started declining. Then, if we talk about Tilak had to leave to England to fight a defamation case against Valentine Kirol. In his book, Valentine Kirol called Tilak as the father of Indian unrest. And to fight a defamation case, Tilak had to leave to England to fight the defamation case against Kirol, and his league also started declining in India. Then the third factor was that Gandhian politics was on rise, and when Gandhian politics was on rise, it eclipsed every other form of political activity, and the Home Rule movement was on decline from this time onwards. Then, if we talk about the Home Rule League, certainly here we can figure out that Gandhiji used the presence of All India organizational structure of Home Rule League to launch his own Satyagraha. So one of the significance and the contributions of Home Rule League was that by creating the All India presence of organization, it supported in the rise of Gandhian politics. Extra information that you should know, that the Home Rule movement generated the pressure, and partially this was also responsible for the British reform of Government of India Act 1919. This was there because of multiple factors, but one of the factors that led to this reform was the pressure generated by the Home Rule movement. Another contribution of Home Rule movement was that it brought more coordination between the extremists and the moderates, and that led to the Lucknow union of the extremists and the moderates. Look, just now we discussed that there were two Home Rule Leagues, one led by Annie Besant, one led by Tilak. Annie Besant was very famous moderate leader. Tilak was one of the most prominent extremist leaders, and both of them, they coordinated with each other through the Home Rule movements, and that is why it supported the coordination between both the sides of extremists and the moderates, and made possible the Lucknow session of Congress in 1916, where the extremists and the moderates, they united again. The biggest significance of Home Rule movement was that it filled the political vacuum when no other political activity was going on. Look, there were three political fillers in Indian national movement. One was the Home Rule movement. When no political activity was going on in India after the Surat Split, it was the Home Rule movement that filled the political vacuum. The second political filler was that of the rise of Swarajists. After the withdrawal of non-cooperation movement by Gandhiji, there was hardly any political activity, and this political vacuum was filled by the political activities of the Swarajists. The third political factor was INA, Azad Hind Fauj. After the Quit India movement had failed, there was no political activity in India, and this political gap was filled by INA. So the first political filler, major political filler in Indian national movement was Home Rule movement. But by 1920, it was completely on decline, and that is why it was renamed as Swarajya Sabha by Gandhiji. Simple. Another question, a very interesting question from UPSC 2011. This question says that Mahatma Gandhi said that some of the deepest convictions were reflected in a book titled Unto This Last, and the book transformed his life. What were the masses from the book? What were the masses from the book that transformed Mahatma Gandhi? Mahatma Gandhi was much inspired by some of the greatest works, or some of the big books. He himself mentioned that there were 3 books that completely transformed him. One book was Civil Disobedience. Civil Disobedience. That was written by Thoreau. Thoreau, a great writer. He is also known for writing of a book, a classic book called Walden. Walden is a classic book written on the reflections of life. Then another book that transformed personality of Gandhiji was the book by Tolstoy, and it was called The Kingdom of God is within you, The book that was written by Tolstoy. In fact, Gandhiji was so much inspired by Tolstoy, and he was constantly in correspondence with Tolstoy. Then, one more book that inspired him a lot was the book Unto This Last. And this book, Unto This Last, was written by John Ruskin. John Ruskin. What was the major idea of this book that inspired Gandhiji a lot? This was the idea that the good of individual is contained in the good of all. Gandhiji was much inspired by the idea, and in fact in Gujarati he tried to transform the same idea and called this in Gujarati as the idea of Sarvodaya, welfare for all. So the book Unto This Last inspired Gandhiji a lot. Another interesting information that you should have, that when Gandhiji was in South Africa, he established 2 farms. One was the Tolstoy farm. He was much inspired by Tolstoy. I discussed with you. And the Tolstoy farm was established by him, inspired by the writings of Tolstoy. Then another farm that he established in South Africa was the Phoenix farm. The Phoenix farm again was very significant because in this Phoenix farm, everybody was paid equally, irrespective of the nature of the job that person was doing. The Phoenix farm was there, inspired by the ideas of this book, Unto This Last, written by John Ruskin. So Gandhiji was much inspired by the ideas given by so many books. Another question from UPSC 2007 exam. A very simple question. At which one of the following places did Mahatma Gandhi first start his Satyagraha in India? It's very simple. It was Champaran of Bihar, where Gandhiji started his first Satyagraha from. But additional information that we can have here, that from 1893 to 1914, Gandhiji stayed in South Africa, and fought against the racial discrimination that was shown against the Indians. During his nearly 20 years of struggle in South Africa, he developed the technique of Satyagraha there. In 1914, there was Gandhi Smuts Agreement. And after this, Gandhiji could start for India, and through England reached India in 1915. Smuts, that time was the military general in South Africa, and the Gandhi Smuts Agreement gave some minor political concessions to the Indians. So he started from South Africa and through England reached India in 1915. By this time, the First World War had already started, and Gandhiji did not want to go against the British government at this stage, so for 1 year he did not take any political stand. 1916, he started with his first activity by establishing Sabarmati Ashram on the banks of river Sabarmati nearby Ahmedabad. Then the first major political activity started in 1917 with Champaran Satyagraha. 1917 Champaran Satyagraha was there, and in 1918 Gandhiji came up with two more Satyagraha. One was Ahmedabad Satyagraha, and the second one was Kheda Satyagraha. Both of them in Gujarat. These were the initial major political activities by Gandhiji. Now, if we talk about the Champaran Satyagraha of 1917, again the next UPSC question is related with this. The question is from UPSC 2020 exam, and it is asking that the indigo cultivation in India declined by the beginning of 20th century because, look, the beginning of 20th century, we can take it as 1917 around Champaran Satyagraha. What was the trouble in Champaran? First of all, that you should know that in Champaran there was Tinkathia system. Under this Tinkathia system, the farmers were compelled to go for indigo cultivation on 3/20th part of the land. Tinkathia, Tin, and Katta is the measurement of land in Bihar. So 3/20th part of the land, the farmers were compelled to go for indigo cultivation. The trouble was that in international market, there was introduction of new inventions. For example, the Germans, they had introduced synthetic dye. And that is why the prices of natural indigo had completely crashed. But still, the British planters, they were compelling the farmers to go for indigo cultivation, and all the losses which were there, they were passed on to the farmers. If the farmers wanted to leave this system, a very huge compensation was demanded from the farmers. That led to economic ruin of the farmers. It was proving to be economically a big disaster for the farmers in Champaran. So the roots of the crisis in Champaran was the Tinkathia system. And certainly you will find that the indigo prices had crashed in international market because the Germans, they had introduced new inventions like synthetic dye, and the natural indigo production had become unprofitable in the world market. So answer here would be B. 2020 UPSC question this is. The next question is from 2010 UPSC exam, and it is again asking about Champaran Satyagraha. In Champaran, just now we discussed that there was a huge crisis because of Tinkathia-like system, leading to economic disaster for the farmers there. And from Champaran, Rajkumar Shukla invited Gandhiji to come to Champaran and to investigate the situation there. In Champaran Satyagraha, Gandhiji was also supported by many other major leaders. Dr. Rajendra Prasad was one of them. Then another great leader, Anugrah Narayan Singh. Another great leader, Maulana Mazhar ul Haq. Then another great leader was Narhari Parikh. Then Acharya J.B. Kriplani. Then Mahadev Desai. Now it's very interesting to know that Mahadev Desai was also personal diarist of Gandhiji, and we know so much extra information about Gandhiji because of the diary that was maintained by Mahadev Desai. Many leaders supported Gandhiji in this Champaran Satyagraha. So, if you say that Dr. Rajendra Prasad persuaded Mahatma Gandhi to come to Champaran to investigate the problem of peasants, this would be wrong, because it was Rajkumar Shukla who invited Gandhiji to come to Champaran and to investigate the situation there. Though Rajendra Prasad was one of the colleagues, but then certainly it was Rajkumar Shukla who had invited Gandhiji to Champaran. Then Acharya J.B. Kriplani was one of Mahatma Gandhi's colleagues in Champaran Satyagraha. This is true. J.B. Kriplani was one of the associates of Gandhiji. J.B. Kriplani, a great leader from Bihar, he was a teacher of English in LS College, in Muzaffarpur, in Bihar. Why I am giving you this extra information is because this would help you in solving the next question of UPSC. See, the next question of UPSC. The next question is from UPSC 2008, and it says that who among the following Gandhian followers was a teacher by profession? Just now we discussed that it was Acharya J.B. Kriplani who was a teacher, and he was one of the associates of Gandhiji in Champaran Satyagraha. Answer here would be C. The next question is from UPSC 2018 exam, and again this is a question on Champaran Satyagraha. It says that which one of the following is a very significant aspect of Champaran Satyagraha? Champaran Satyagraha was very significant because for the first time it converted national movement into a real mass movement. Look, earlier the extremists, they wanted to expand the social base of national movement, but they could not attract the peasantry, and they were not very influential in the rural area. It was for the first time that Champaran Satyagraha connected the peasant unrest of India with national movement, and the farmers, they were the biggest section of society. So this converted national movement into a real mass movement for the first time in India. Champaran was also very significant from other perspectives, like for example, Champaran Satyagraha was the first successful experiment of Satyagraha by Gandhiji in India. Satyagraha, the technique of Satyagraha, was developed by Gandhiji in South Africa, and without Champaran it was very difficult to predict with how it would actually work in India, and whether it would work in India after all or not at all. So this was the first successful experiment of Satyagraha by Gandhiji in India, and that was again very significant. And third, that after the Champaran Satyagraha, Gandhiji was accepted as a mass leader. And a similar question was framed by UPSC, a beautiful question, that it was Champaran of Bihar that made Gandhi Mahatma. Truly, after this time, he would be considered the biggest mass leader in India. Another question, which of the following pairs are correctly matched? UPSC 2005 question this is. See, when you talk about Champaran Satyagraha, just now we have seen that Champaran Satyagraha, Dr. Rajendra Prasad was one of the colleagues of Gandhiji. And from this time onward, he would become a big Gandhian leader. Satyagraha was a very beautiful technique. One of the most brilliant aspects of Champaran Satyagraha or Satyagraha would be that when so many Gandhian movements would be there, each time it would lead to rise of so many Gandhi-like leaders. So during the Satyagrahas, during the movements, many Gandhi-like leaders, they also emerged. In Champaran Satyagraha, Dr. Rajendra Prasad became a very prominent Gandhian leader. First is correct. Second is Ahmedabad mill strike. Champaran had already connected the rural poor and the farmers into national movement. Now the task was to connect the urban poor into national movement, and that is why Gandhiji certainly would go for Ahmedabad like a Satyagraha for the workers and it would be symbolic, but certainly it would connect the big number of urban poor into national movement. Every Gandhian movement was very carefully drafted to serve the overall nationalistic purpose. Ahmedabad mill strike. What was the trouble in Ahmedabad? In 1918, the Satyagraha was there. This was the time the First World War was about to end, and the World War had aggravated the inflation. The prices were on rise. Now, Russia-Ukraine crisis is going on, and you will find that just a single war, but this single war had led to rising inflation in India. Think about World War, how big inflationary pressure it would create in India. The workers, they were demanding a hike in the wages of 50%. But when the demand was there, the mill owners, they were not happy with this idea and they opposed this. The Mill Owner Association was led by Ambalal Sarabhai. Gandhiji started a Satyagraha, and in this Satyagraha, Gandhiji was supported by Anusuya Sarabhai. Anusuya Sarabhai. Now, Anusuya Sarabhai, she was also sister of Ambalal Sarabhai, but she supported Gandhiji. From this time onward, Anusuya Ben became a big Gandhian leader. So, Ahmedabad mill strike is associated with Anusuya Bai and not with Morarji Desai. Second is gone. First is correct, second is not correct. Kheda Satyagraha. Again, Kheda Satyagraha was in 1918. Kheda is a place in Gujarat. And in Gujarat, there was a drought-like condition. But during this drought-like condition, the British still insisted for 100% realization of the revenues by the farmers. Gandhiji gave the call for non-payment of taxes, but he gave the moral call. The actual campaign was organized by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. So third, Kheda, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. That is again correct. 1 and 3, they are correct. Answer here would be 1 and 3. So 2 is incorrect. Ahmedabad was known for Anusuya Bai's leadership. Second is absolutely incorrect. Then do one thing. Eliminate 2 out of A. Eliminate 2 out of B. Eliminate 2 out of D. So D, B and A gone. What you will find? C would be the answer. Anyway, you can come across the answer by elimination as well. Now my question is, if we can solve this question from 2 methods, will it not make the possibility of negative marking almost 0 in this question? That is why whenever we are getting the question, the effort should be to try to solve the question from multiple methods. Clear? Another question from UPSC 2011 exam. It says that what was the reason for Mahatma Gandhi to organize a Satyagraha on behalf of parents of Kheda? Just now we discussed that in Kheda there was a drought-like situation and the British were inclined to get 100% of the realization of the revenues from the farmers. And that is why Gandhiji gave the call for non-payment of the taxes. And this Kheda Satyagraha was organized by Sardar Patel. So the first statement, that administration did not suspend the land revenue collection in spite of a drought, this is correct. Second statement says that the administration proposed to introduce permanent settlement in Gujarat. This is wrong. Permanent settlement was never introduced in Gujarat. Look, the 3 main type of land revenue settlements which were brought by British in India, they were permanent settlement, they were Mahalwari settlement, and it was again Rayatwari settlement. Now, on a rough diagram, if you just talk about the British India, excluding the princely states, then permanent settlement or Jamindari settlement was introduced mainly in the areas like Bihar, Bengal and Odisha. And Mahalwari settlement covered the the western part of India like Punjab, parts of UP, Ganga Valley, and also some parts of central India. Rayatwari settlement basically covered southern India. Southern India, mainly Bombay and Madras like presidency. To say that the permanent settlement was introduced in Gujarat then would be incorrect. So 2 is incorrect, 1 is correct, A would be the answer. Then, who was the Viceroy of India when the Rowlatt Act was passed? 2008 UPSC question this is. Simple question. Rowlatt Act. When Rowlatt Act was brought? 1919. Rowlatt Act was brought. And this was the time of Lord Chelmsford. The time period of Lord Chelmsford was, as the Viceroy, 1916 to 1921. That was the time period of Lord Chelmsford. Why the British came up with Rowlatt Act? That is also a question. What was the situation in 1919 in Indian national movement? First of all, there was a huge rise in nationalism in India. And due to multiple factors. First factor was the First World War, which had created a huge economic crisis. And the huge economic crisis would always lead to a huge political churning as well. Second factor, during the war, all the imperial powers, they had promised self-determination to their colonies, like India was promised self-determination by the British. But after the war, the imperial powers like Britain, they started going back on their promises, and that led to resentment. Third, in 1916, there was Lucknow session of Congress. And what happened? The extremists and the moderates, just now we discussed, they came together. In Lucknow, again what happened? That Congress and Muslim League, they also came together as Congress League Pact was there. So don't you think that the extremists, the moderates, Congress and Muslim League, they were all against the British by 1916. And there was huge jump in nationalism. The people in India, they were also much inspired by the international events, like you talk about Russian Revolution. Russian Revolution of 1917, that proved very inspiring for the nationalism and national movements across the world. The new communist government gave up all the claims over their colonies and they declared the support to national movements across the world. That was very practical from their side as well. We must know that the idea of Marx was not nationalism. Marx was internationalist. Russian Revolution was not sufficient. What was needed? A world revolution. And this would only be possible if the communist ideology would be very popular across the world. So to make the communist ideology very popular, the new government of USSR, the communist government, gave up the claims over the colonies and declared the support to the national movements across the world. We have to know that that was the time the biggest part of the world was under the colonial rule. So that would make the communist ideology very popular across the world, then and there itself. But certainly, as a byproduct, it proved to be very inspiring for the nationalism in India as well. Multiple factors. Nationalism was rising in India. And the British now would try to come up with their policy of carrot and stick. What was the carrot? The carrot was the Government of India Act 1919. And the stick was the Rowlatt Act. That was also brought in 1919. Simultaneously they were brought. And simultaneously they were brought as the carrot and stick policy. Now, if we talk about Rowlatt Act, Rowlatt Act was actually officially called Anarchical and Revolutionary Crimes Act. It was officially called Anarchical and Revolutionary Crimes Act. And this was based on the recommendation of a sedition committee. Sedition Committee or Sedition Commission of 1917, that was headed by Sidney Rowlatt. Sidney Rowlatt. And that is why, headed by Sidney Rowlatt, this commission recommended, which became the basis of this act, and that is why it was called the Rowlatt Act. Rowlatt Act was called Black Act by the Indians because it authorized the government to imprison anybody without any trial. Correct? So Rowlatt Act authorized the British government to imprison anybody without any trial. So no trial. And that is why basically it bypassed the due process of law. Basically it bypassed the due process of law. It was called as a law with no dalil, no vakil, no appeal. No, it was really no dalil, no vakil, and no appeal. There was no chance of appeal. The entire process of due process of law was bypassed. Rowlatt Act was designed to suppress Indian nationalism and led to a massive protest in India. And this Rowlatt Act created the controversy, leading to a huge protest which merged with the bigger style of Gandhian politics. It was in April 1919 that Gandhiji organized. It was in April 1919 that Gandhiji organized the Rowlatt Satyagraha. One strike, all India strike, all India strike, all India strike against the Rowlatt Act. And this protest against Rowlatt Act merged with the bigger part of Gandhian politics and Satyagraha. So the answer here would be C. Lord Chelmsford was the viceroy at the time of Rowlatt Act when it was brought. I'm not giving you detail here of the Act of 1919 because once we cover the national movement part, in other parts of History Simplified series, we are going to take up so many other issues like constitutional development, like revolutionaries, like civil and tribal uprising, like so many other things, like British expansion and so many other things we are going to cover. More than that, I would like to invite suggestions from your side. What other topics you want me to discuss in this History Simplified series? So you can always suggest me. I will take up those issues and will try to discuss them in the coming sessions of History Simplified series. The Anarchical and Revolutionary Crimes Act 1919 was popularly known as 1996 UPSC question. This is just now we discussed that the sedition committee was headed by Sidney Rowlatt. The recommendations became the basis of Rowlatt Act, but officially it was called Anarchical and Revolutionary Crimes Act. So answer here would be A. Rowlatt Act was called Anarchical and Revolutionary Crimes Act. Another question, 2009. During the Indian freedom struggle, why did Rowlatt Act arouse popular indignation? Just now we discussed that the Rowlatt Act authorized the government to imprison people without any trial, bypassing the due process of law. And that is why it was termed as Black Act by the Indians, and there was a massive protest in India. So answer here would be C. One thing is there that you should know, that for every question I'm trying to give you some extra details. Once we have the idea about the topic, so many questions which would be rotated by UPSC around the same topic, we can easily solve. So we should basically have a very good, clear understanding, basic understanding of the concept first, and then we can solve any question of UPSC around that. Another question by UPSC 1999 exam. It says that the first venture of Gandhi in all India politics was. It is a more conceptual like question, and we have to discuss it now. That if you talk about the options, many close options are there. Dandi March can be eliminated because it led to the civil disobedience movement that came much later. Already there were so many movements by Gandhiji by that time. So eliminate D. Now we're still left with three more options. Champaran was very significant, but this was localized. No, Champaran was a localized movement in the area of Champaran. So Champaran can also be eliminated. But now we are in trouble because two options, they are very close to each other. Rowlatt Satyagraha and non-cooperation movement. Non-cooperation movement would start in August 1920. Rowlatt Satyagraha. When this was there? April 1919. Just now we discussed that Gandhiji called for one all India Satyagraha and strike against Rowlatt Act in April 1919. So Rowlatt Satyagraha was in April 1919. So answer here would not be non-cooperation movement. Answer here would be Rowlatt Satyagraha, because this was the call by Gandhiji to go for all India strike. And you have to be very careful here that the question is just talking about the first venture, not about the first big movement by Gandhiji in India on all India scale. Ventures may be successful, maybe not successful. Certainly this Rowlatt Satyagraha was not very successful, but the first effort by Gandhiji on all India level, first venture by Gandhiji on all India level was this Rowlatt Satyagraha. So answer here would be B, and A would not be the answer. Again, that you should know that when you talk about this question, two options A and B, they are very close to each other. And we know that in three types of exams: IAS, IIM and IIT. The exam would give you so many questions in which two options they can be eliminated, but rest of the two options would be very close to each other. So the question is, should you attempt such questions in exam or not? The decision is yours, but just want to show you something that when you talk about the UPSC paper, 100 questions are there in preliminary examination, and we can divide it into three categories. 10 questions around very difficult. No, 10 questions around very difficult. We do not know half of the time which chapter they have asked it from. आधे टाइम बिल्कुल भी नहीं पता होगा कि कहाँ से उन्होंने पूछा ये सवाल, और एग्जाम के दिन मैं बिल्कुल नहीं मिलूंगा इन सवालों के लिए. Second category, 60% of the questions, they would be easy to moderate. Easy to moderate. Now this is the meatiest part of the paper, and if you want to clear the paper, you must attempt this part, around 60% of the questions which are easy to moderate questions. A quarter of the questions, around 25 to 30% of the questions would be such like that you cannot eliminate two of the options, but two of the options, they would be very close to each other. No? So the question is, we are not decisive, and what to do with these questions. Suppose that a candidate tries to attempt all the 30 questions. Then on a good day, the average success should be 15 questions correct and 15 questions wrong, because you have already eliminated two of the options and rest of the two options are there. So 50% of the probability of getting right or wrong. So on an average, 15 questions should be right, 15 questions should be wrong. But if this is so, on an average, you are going to get the marks for 15 questions and 1/3 is negative, -5 questions. So what that would lead to? On an average, a profit of 10 questions. And on average, this would lead to a profit of 20 marks. On an average. Now, one thing is a prerequisite, that if you want to use this section, you should have a very rigorous practice for such questions so that you can use this type of a strategy into your exam. When you try to solve the RAU'S test series, you will find that so many such questions, they have been inserted there in which two options are very close and confusing, so that you get the idea how to use this part in exam. Second prerequisite is that you must be a very well-read person, because if you are a well-read person, you would go for intelligent guess, more than 15 correct. If you're not a well-read person, then you will go for one wild guess, more than 15 incorrect. UPSC is trying to figure those candidates who are very good in reading in preliminary examination itself. Third thing, why you should be careful about this section, this part of the paper, because think about it again, 10 questions very difficult. All the good candidates who would clear the exam, they know that they do not have to attempt this part. To avoid the negative marking, gone. 60 questions, easy and moderate. So easy and moderate questions would be attempted by all the candidates who would clear the exam, gone. Because this is also common. Then what is the decider? The 30 questions in which two options are very close to each other, they would create the deciding factor. This is the most decisive part of the paper. If you are good in dealing with this part of the paper, you are good in clearing the paper itself, the exam itself. So you have to practice it a lot. Objective questions, you should keep practicing through the test series and the previous year questions. The question was very good question from UPSC exam 1999. One more question from 2015 UPSC exam. With reference to Rowlatt Satyagraha, which of the following statements is or are correct? First, Rowlatt Act was based on the recommendations of Sedition Committee. True it is. Sedition Committee, just now we discussed, 1917 was appointed under Sidney Rowlatt. The recommendations became the basis of Rowlatt Act. Then, in Rowlatt Satyagraha, Gandhiji tried to utilize the Home Rule League. True it is. Just now we discussed that the Home Rule League created all India presence. And all India presence of Home Rule League, certainly it gave the support to the Gandhian style of politics. When Gandhiji tried to launch All India Satyagraha, he used the organizational presence of Home Rule League to launch his Satyagraha. Third, the demonstration against arrival of Simon Commission coincided with Rowlatt Act. This is not correct. Rowlatt Act 1919. Simon Commission. No, this was Rowlatt Act. Simon Commission. Simon Commission was appointed in 1927 and it came to India in 1928. It's impossible to say that the demonstration, they coincided with each other. That is gone. What was the significance of Rowlatt Act and Simon Commission? There were three permanent markers in Indian national movement, permanent deflections in Indian national movement. First, partition of Bengal. For the first time, from the era of constitutional agitation of prayers and petition, we moved towards the era of Swadeshi and boycott, extra constitutional way of agitation. No, that was the first deflection that we got in national movement. The second deflection was Rowlatt Act. Rowlatt Act started the era of mass movement in India. Rowlatt Act started the era of mass movement in India. The third deflection was Simon Commission. The third deflection was Simon Commission, because after Simon Commission, we demanded Purna Swaraj. That was another permanent deflection in national movement. So there were three permanent deflection in national movement: partition of Bengal, Rowlatt Act, and Simon Commission. Simple. Third statement is wrong. First and second, they are correct. Now, another question that was asked by UPSC in 1995. In 1995, what is the correct sequence of the following events? Lucknow Pact. We discussed this was Congress League Pact. Lucknow Pact, this was 1916. Diarchy was introduced by the Government of India Act 1919. Rowlatt Act was brought in 1919. Now the trouble would start, because the Rowlatt Act and Diarchy, by the Act of 1919, both of them, they came in 1919 itself. And there would be a tendency now among the students tried to mug up the crude facts like the months in which they were brought. And that would be a disaster, because if you try to tackle the syllabus through facts, it would become very difficult. There are so many facts. UPSC would never encourage rote learning. It would always encourage you to solve the questions through logic and concept. See, the fourth says that partition of Bengal, that was there in 1905. So 4 should come at the first place. No? The two options where 4 is coming at the first place, they are B and D. So A and C, they're gone. After 4, 1 should come. The only option where 1 would come after 4 is B. So here answer would be B. UPSC is not looking for you to mug up the crude facts. Rather, you should know the significant paradigm shifts in national movement. That would be more than sufficient. Another question by UPSC 2007 exam, it says that which one of the following aroused a wave of popular indignation that led to massacre by the British at Jallianwala Bagh? Simple, it was Rowlatt Act. It had created a massive protest in India. And to protest against the Rowlatt Act, just now we discussed that in April 1919, Gandhiji called for an all-India strike. But in many places, the people, they started turning violent. And one such place where there was a mob-like situation, there was a trouble, there was unrest, was Amritsar. Where this Jallianwala Bagh is there. The Jallianwala Bagh is called Jallianwala Bagh because it was created by Pandit Jalla. And Pandit Jalla was one of the ministers of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So, the Jallianwala Bagh issue was on 13th of April 1919. A big number of people, they had gathered there in Jallianwala Bagh, first to protest against the arrest of the popular leaders like Saifuddin Kichlu and Dr. Satyapal. And a big number of people, they also gathered to celebrate Baisakhi. Baisakhi is the New Year festival for the Sikh. So, the big number of people gathered, and we all know that what happened. General Dyer ordered firing on the innocent people. So, he was General Dyer, who ordered the forces to start firing, leading to a big number of casualty, and that what led to the massacre at Jallianwala Bagh. Additional information that you should have that General Dyer was the person responsible for this firing, but at this time, Michael O. Dwyer was the Lieutenant Governor of Punjab. So there were two very similar names. One was Dyer, responsible for the firing. One was Michael O. Dwyer, who was the Lieutenant Governor of Punjab that time. And certainly he was also responsible for this administrative decision. So later, Michael O. Dwyer was killed by the revolutionary Udham Singh. Udham Singh, additional information that he took for himself a name that was Ram Muhammad Singh Azad. Interesting name. All the revolutionaries, most of the leaders, certainly they were very secular in themselves, and they always believed that when all the communities, they were together, then only Hindustan would be a very strong country. No? They took the name of Ram Muhammad Singh Azad. Later he assassinated Michael O. Dwyer to avenge this Jallianwala Bagh issue. So answer here would be C, the Rowlatt Act. Simple. Another question, 2004 UPSC exam. The name of the famous person of India who returned knighthood conferred on him by British government as a token of protest against the atrocities in Punjab in 1919 was very simple. We know that he was Ravindranath Tagore, who gave up this knighthood in protest of Jallianwala Bag issue. The Jallianwala Bagh issue was a turning point in the history of British imperial rule in India. Till this time, many Indians still wanted to coordinate with British to get the political and constitutional concessions, including Gandhiji, who was somewhat pro-British till this time. But from this time onward, there was a permanent deflection. The Indians and the major leaders, they would never try to get a compromise from the British. Rather, now they would demand more and more self-determination like thing, and they would not be ready to support the pro-British policies. Jallianwala Bagh, after that, Ravindranath Tagore gave up the title of knighthood, gave up this knighthood, and Mahatma Gandhi gave up a medal that was called Kaisar-e-Hind. Kaisar-e-Hind. This was given up by Gandhiji. And Gandhiji was given this medal, Kaisar-e-Hind, when he supported the British war efforts in Boer War. What was Boer War? The Boer were the Dutch farmers. And by defeating the Dutch farmers called Boers, the British captured big areas which later got converted into Union of South Africa. So when Gandhiji was there in South Africa, he was supporting British war efforts during this Boer War. That is why he was given the medal Kaisar-e-Hind that he gave up after this Jallianwala Bagh issue. Clear? Another question. 2001 UPSC question this is. A simple question. It says that Hunter Commission was appointed after. Answer is simple. Jallianwala Bagh issue. Jallianwala Bagh had created a massive resentment in India. And that is why the British appointed the Hunter Commission to look into this Jallianwala Bagh issue. It was headed by Hunter, and that is why it was called Hunter Commission. There were some Indian leaders as well. Part of this, Indian members were made part of this to give this one Indian-like shape. The three prominent members from Indian side, they were Chimnalal, Hiralal, Pandit Jagat Narayan, and Sahibzada Sultan Ahmad. They were the three members from Indian side. But certainly the committee was just one eyewash. And it did not give any punishment to Dyer. Dyer was just removed from services. He was recalled to England, but he was not given any punishment. In fact, when General Dyer was there in England, there were many efforts by British to support him financially. Like, there was a newspaper called Morning Post. And this Morning Post organized a fund to economically support General Dyer. In this fund that was organized by the newspaper Morning Post, many British, very prominent British, they had contributed towards it. Like one prominent name was Kipling, Rudyard Kipling. Rudyard Kipling was the famous writer of the book Jungle Book, Mowgli, Jungle Book. He was the writer of that. So many British, they were still supporting Dyer. Jallianwala Bagh certainly aggravated the resentment of the Indians. Then Hunter Commission further aggravated the resentment of the Indians because it did not give any punishment to General Dyer. Additional information that you should have, that if you talk about Hunter Commission, there was earlier also a Hunter Commission. And that Hunter Commission, another Hunter Commission much before, came in 1882 to look into the educational reforms. And this was appointed by Viceroy and Governor General Ripon. The time period of Ripon was 1880 to 84. He appointed this first Hunter Commission to look into the educational reform. So this is another extra related information. On YouTube, I have uploaded another video that is on educational reform or the development of education during the British time. You can find the details of this Hunter Commission and all the committees related with education in that video. Another question by UPSC 1996 question. It says that the non-cooperation movement led to what? It led to Congress becoming a mass movement for the first time, growth of Hindu-Muslim unity, removal of the fear of the British might, and the British willingness to grant political concessions to the Indians. It's a tricky question. In first go, all the options, they would look almost correct. But that is not the case. If you say the fourth option, British government willingness to grant political concession, one thing is for sure, that first came the Act of 1919, Government of India Act 1919. And then came the non-cooperation movement. So it was not that first came non-cooperation movement and then the political concession was given by the British. Then the next political concession that was given to the Indians was the Government of India Act 1935. And that came a way long time after this non-cooperation movement. Even civil disobedience movement had failed by that time. Then only this Act of 1935 came. So you cannot say that the movement pressurized the British to come up with a political concession in India. Fourth is absolutely wrong. Now, eliminate 4 out of A, eliminate 4 out of D. 2 options are gone. Now you're left with just 2 options, B and C. In both B and C, 3 is common. So 3 must be correct. You need not worry about it. Removal of fear of the British might from the minds of the people. True it is. Bipan Chandra says that the non-cooperation movement, we did not get Swaraj, but certainly within our hearts we had realized what Swaraj would be. We were not afraid. British imperialism rested on 2 pillars. One was benevolence, and that pillar was broken by the moderates when they exposed the drain of wealth from India. The second pillar of British imperialism was fear, and that was broken when Gandhian Satyagraha was there. So 3 is correct and 3 is common in both of them. You have to decide between 1 and 2. So when you talk about first, Congress becoming a mass movement for the first time, true it is. The Nagpur session of Congress. The Nagpur session of Congress was in 1920. Gandhiji reorganized the entire Congress and restructured it till the village level. And he also was instrumental behind establishment of Congress Working Committee. The Congress Working Committee was formed at the apex of decision making, having 15 members, so that the decisions of Congress would be more democratic in nature. So don't you think that this completely and radically changed the entire structure of Congress? Gandhiji always believed that to be able to launch one all India like movement, first Congress should be one all India like organization, reaching to even the lowest level of a structure, the village level. So true it is, Bipan Chandra himself admits that it was the Nagpur session of Congress during non-cooperation movement that converted it into a real mass movement. So first is correct. Then second must be incorrect. And it is incorrect. But it looks like correct. That is the trouble. Let's try to analyze this. Most of us, we believe that non-cooperation movement, it would lead to growth of Hindu-Muslim unity. It did not. Khilafat issue was used to bring Hindu-Muslim unity during the movement. But what happened? Once the movement was withdrawn, the Hindu-Muslim unity broke down. So during the movement, there was a good communal harmony. But once the movement was withdrawn, the communal harmony broke down. So you cannot say that non-cooperation movement led to Hindu-Muslim unity? Bipan Chandra explains this very beautifully. What he says that the movement was good in raising religious, political consciousness, but it failed to convert this into secular political consciousness. No, the religious political consciousness was there due to religious issue and other issues. The people, they participated, but the movement could not convert this religious political consciousness into secular political consciousness. And once the movement was withdrawn, the overall harmony between Hindus and Muslims, it broke down. Second is incorrect. No? So eliminate now 2. You get your answer. C would be the answer. A very tricky question, a very conceptual question this is. No matter if you're talking about even preliminary like examination, UPSC is emphasizing on a conceptual clarity. So for history, rather than fact, you have to emphasize on conceptual clarity. Some facts would always be required, but the priority is always there to get the conceptual clarity. Now, this is what I wanted to discuss with you in this session of History Simplified series. In the next session of History Simplified series, we will take the discussion from this point onward, non-cooperation movement and 1920 onwards, and we will cover till the time of the start of the Second World War, covering everything in between. So the next session would be equally very important and equally very interesting. And further, I would like to invite suggestion from your side. What other topics you would like me to discuss when I am dealing with other sessions of History Simplified series. See you very soon with the next session. Thank you.